Hi, I'm Chris Schroder with the Agency 100, and we're today interviewing Alexis Davis Smith for our first issue that comes out in July 2020. We're going to be talking to Alexis about how to hire, address the issues that we need to, and then just a little bit about our cultural in general, where we are and how far along we've come since she started in the initiative. So Alexis, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you so much for honoring me to be your first interviewee and subject for Agency 100. I'm excited about this conversation, so thank you again. I look forward to this conversation and seeing it when it posts.
Doing a little research, we found that in the labor pool for agencies across America, we are underrepresenting African Americans. According to all the studies I've been able to find, Asian Americans are right at their index points, 6.5% of their representation in the labor pool. Latinx is not too far behind. They have a gap to make up, but for some reason, African Americans tend to be where they are 12+% of the labor pool. They're only 8.5% according to most of the research in the agency world. And we're just wondering, as owners and leaders of agencies today, why do you think that might be, and how do we go about correcting that?
Yes, the public relations industry, advertising industries, every industry, honestly, that you can think about across the board has issues with diversity. That's why diversity and inclusion is a hot topic. It has become an even hotter topic in the last 3 to 4 weeks. But honestly and truthfully, I've been hearing the same kind of, what I'm going to say, excuses and considerations for the last 20 years or so. Honestly and truthfully, I'm sick to death of hearing about diversity issues because these are things that could have been solved. And it's been more conversation as opposed to action. And I just think some of the easiest things to do, because when we talk about diversity in any industry, we have to look at it from a broad perspective. You're talking about how you recruit, but also how you retain. Recruiting is probably the easiest thing that we can do. There are historically Black colleges and universities across the country, primarily settled on the East Coast. You have some that have very strong communications departments where you can pick talent for our industries by offering internships, by visiting them, speaking to them about the industry, opening the doors. And that is one way. And what I see in my network is that people tend to go to the schools and the networks that we know. So, in Atlanta, you have the University of Georgia, which a lot of people went to. So they're always going back to recruit from UGA. And so you have to look broader than that. You have to look at a Spelman College. You have to look at a Clark Atlanta. You can go down to Florida A&M University, which is 4 hours away. HBCUs, they're just probably the best opportunity to get new talent. So when we talk about recruiting, start there. That's easy. In terms of retention, once you get African American employees in your doors, you have to make sure that you have created an environment that is inclusive, that makes them feel a part of the culture, but also you have provided opportunities for them to grow and advance and to really give them a solid voice at the table so that they can continue to grow to reach those levels of vice president, SVP, and managing directors. There's only like 1 or 2 that I know of African Americans leading local agencies. And then when you start looking at the real senior level C-suite, you don't see a lot. You do in corporate America, but in the agency perspective, there's definitely a lot of room for growth.
So if I'm an agency leader today and I want to make a change in my environment, my culture, do I start by bringing in young students from HBCUs and other places and start there? Or do I get some lateral moves from other industries? Or are we going to be, are the people who are African American or people of color running agencies, are they going to be in really high demand and doing a lot of movement around this country?
Yes, they are. And I'm hoping that the few that are within agencies, that they stay there, because they're going to be the ones that will be able to turn around and reach out to identify other talent that looks like them. But everything you just said, those are definitely good strategies. And I say first and foremost, start with African-American colleagues that you know. And if you don't know us, Google us, reach out to us on LinkedIn or Facebook or in the PR industry groups that you are a part of. We are here and happy to help provide counsel to you. We're happy to provide names to look within our resources, because we have these conversations all the time among our group, particularly our level. I have a group of friends here in Atlanta, all 15, 20 years plus. And we hear that all of the time, that we can't find people. But I asked them one day over dinner, but has anybody called you and asked for a recommendation? And everyone said no. I was the president of the Black Public Relations Society of Atlanta for like 7 years. No one ever called me to ask me for a recommendation. And yet I know someone at every single agency here. So you have to start with the context that you know. You have to recruit new talent, and then you have to cultivate what you have so that you can make sure that they want to stay there and that they can turn around and help you address the diversity issues, because they're going to know how to do it better than anyone else.
So people who are of non-color, let's say, and they suddenly become woke in the last month or two, are we going to cause you to smirk when we call up now and say, hey, do we beat around the bush, or we say, look, I need help, help me out? What's the discourse? How are we going to address this?
Okay, so I'll be honest with you. There might be a little smirks from some people, but I will tell you, more than anything, we are happy that corporate America is finally waking up. They've been talking about being woke for years. They've been talking about a commitment to diversity and inclusion, yet those numbers never change. They never change. African Americans represent 14% of the population. Why is your workforce less than 10? That makes zero sense. Why are you still saying there aren't talented African American people out there that you can't find? That is untrue. You have to get out of your comfort zone and find new ways and initiatives to identify those people. So I will tell you, we will be happy to help. We'll be happy to get those phone calls. Some might be a little skeptical, but you have to come across that you are sincere and genuine, and you do have to deliver on your requests. So if you call me and say, Alexis, I need some talent and I send you some resumes, you need to interview those people. And you need to broaden your perspective of how you usually identify talent and how you connect to people. Because at the end of the day, Chris, we're all human beings and we do function in our comfort zone. So if you see a resume and someone went to the same college you went to, you're going to be like, oh, okay, I want to talk. Or, they're a part of your sorority or your fraternity. There's a natural inclination to give that person a greater chance. You have to go beyond that. At least open the door to the opportunity.
So if we are trying to break this channel of commonality, how do we address this internally with our current employees? And then how do we address it with the folks we'll be interviewing? Because it's going to be somewhat, do we be fully transparent about our initiatives and our goals? Or do we really try to make it out of respect that we're going to look at a wide array of candidates and the best person wins?
Well, the first thing, Chris, is that the company has to embrace this policy from the leadership, from the top down. I always say there's going to be no D&I initiatives that are going to work that don't come from the CEO. The CEO really has to express a sincere commitment for it, and he has to put metrics in place that his leadership teams must deliver on. And they have to have timelines, they have to have goals, they have to have strategies and tactics to support them to make sure that they deliver. And there has to be accountability for it. And that has to start from the top down. So if you are truly able to say to your candidates, these are the policies and protocols and the changes we're trying to make, and honestly say that with transparency, and we would welcome you to be a part of us as we go into this new chapter of business. I think you can totally be transparent, because we're going to respect that more, as opposed to feeling that you're brought in as the token. None of us want to be the token. We want to be brought in for talent. We don't want to be brought in just because you need to check a box off. We want to be brought in because we're going to be valued and we're going to be able to receive equitable opportunities as anyone else.
I know this wasn't probably an expected question, but you brought up the word token, and you did, and I didn't. But I watched some of your great videos recently with a number of people addressing this issue, and there were references to shiny Black people. I didn't quite know what that. Can you enlighten us on that, and whether we should never use that if we're not a Black person?
Yes, yes, you probably should not use the phrase shiny black person if you're not a black person.
What does that mean?
That came from my friend Andrew McCaskill, and we interviewed him for our podcast. And Andrew is very well known in the public relations industry, started here in Atlanta. And he talked about when you do pull outstanding and highly recognized African American talent from agencies and companies, but you're really pulling them because you want someone in that position, that you're checking a box and you're really doing it for the PR and the external visibility out of it. Not that you're really truly going to give them real power. One of my frustrations is there's so many wonderful, talented African American women, primarily in the diversity and industry, diversity and inclusion industry, and in HR positions across this country. And they're hired for these positions, but they're really not empowered to make real differences. So you have these women in positions, in men, in these positions that are there for years, but you don't see the numbers change. And, of course, they're not in a position to really say, well, I'm not empowered. But the truth is, you can tell they're not empowered because nothing is changing.
Well, I know we have to be careful about language and use of words. And I noticed recently, in the past 30 days, American newspapers have agreed to capitalize the B in black when referencing folks of African American descent. It was, more than 100 years ago, 1920s, I guess. W.E. Du Bois was trying to lobby newspapers to capitalize the word Negro. So here we are 100 years later, they've just capitalized the word black. I actually haven't looked to see if they capitalized the word white or anything else. I'm just curious about that. I think that was a really interesting initiative, given all that we've been through with George Floyd and everything here in Atlanta and Georgia. Right. What do folks say if they're a little uncomfortable? Do they say African American? Do they say black? Do they say people of color? What do we say?
Right. Yes. So that's a question I've received a lot over the last 4 weeks. Do we say black? Do we say African American? What's the preference? So my counsel is always to lead with African American. Always lead with African American, but you can use it interchangeably with black. And I've been capitalizing black for as long as I've been doing this, and clients have kind of just followed my guidance. So I'm happy AP has finally caught up.
Wow.
So always start with African American, and then you can use black after that in the second reference, and then interchangeably, because as a writer, it gets kind of tiring to say African American, African American, African American, black, 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 black. You definitely want to mix it up, but I would say defer to African Americans. However, you have to be very conscious of who your audience is. Because we have a client that did not want to use the phrase African Americans because they recognized they had a lot of employees that were of African descent. They weren't African American, they were African born who moved to the United States, and they do not like being called African American. So for them, we use black all the time. So you have to be aware of your audience. But then you have clients who want to say African American and African American only. They don't want to use it interchangeably. So a lot of times it really depends on the client, but definitely on your audience base. But I would just say, as safety, as protocol, African American first, and then black on second and third references.
I always thought it was really great that our first African-American president was truly African-American. His father was African and his mother was American. So that was a great definition and manifestation of that word. So you've been in this business for a long time, a couple of decades, as we discussed. Are we seeing now, I know you're a Philadelphia Eagles fan, even though you've been living in Atlanta for—
Fly, Eagles fly, yes.
You're familiar with the wave and how people will stand up at a baseball game or football game and try to spur other people on to, express enthusiasm. They'll stand up and they'll, come on, get the wave going. And sometimes it goes, it may take 4 or 5, 6 tries before the whole stadium will stand up in the stadiums that we remember and used to go to in the days of yore. So is this a wave that will catch, do you think, with all of this? We've been stuck at home now with the pandemic, and we've been forced to watch our screens, and now we've been watching these really unfortunate displays of video and police killings across the country.
Right.
So it's a curious time. Do you think this all happened maybe at a divine purpose? Not really the question, but do you think this one will actually take?
I do think that this will actually take, Chris, I think that we are at a very pivotal and critical time in our country. Some people are saying it's a moment in time, and then some people are saying it's a movement. And I believe it's a combination of both. I think it's a very historic moment in time. And I think it's a movement, and it's a movement into the future of what America should look like and how it should function and how we should embrace and include people from all backgrounds, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, whatever. So I do think it's the beginning of a movement. And I say that I'm cautiously optimistic. One of the things that has really excited me is that this message of a need for greater social justice has not only happened in the United States, but it has gone across the world. And it's been great to see countries like the United Kingdom and Australia, a whole continent, celebrate and demand, greater diversity. And that saying that Black Lives Matter, a few years ago, companies would have been scared to say Black Lives Matter. So when they started talking about it in their statements and saying it so directly, I was surprised, but pleasantly surprised. So I think it's a wave that is going around, and you do still have some sitting there. I'm not going to participate. I'm not going to participate and get in the fun. But slowly you're starting to see more and more people and companies and industries stand up. And there still will be a few who will sit down and won't participate. And you know what? I think, I'm not gonna say that's fine, but that's realistic, and I understand, and I get that. One of the things that I've been saying, this has been about a month now, maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks going into this movement, but you don't undo 400 years of oppression in a couple of months. That's gonna take time. And I think we all understand that, but I believe what we've been seeing has already started delivering some positive outcomes, and it's making companies more woke and recognizing that before they talk to their external audiences, they have to get their own houses in order as well. And so I think that's a positive change. It's just important that they remember, if they put out corporate statements, it's not enough to say it. You have to have action, and you have to deliver on it. You're going to have to walk the talk, and you're going to have to put real money and real resources and a real time commitment behind the stance that you have now publicly stated.
Alexis, in the agency business, we talk a lot about strategy and tactics. And I feel like we've had a lot of statements that perhaps counseled by the agencies who are watching this very video, that they should have made statements and did to a great degree about COVID and the pandemic, and then also about multicultural marketing and acceptance of other people, and trying to affect change in their industries. But do you think those are just tactics, and that we need to be thinking at a much higher level about strategy, and how do we change not just people's policies and not even just their minds, but change their habits? How do you think we're just at a tactical stage, or do you think we're really at a strategic change stage?
Over the last 2 months, when we've seen really an onslaught of messaging around Black Lives Matter, and many companies speaking publicly about social injustice and diversity and inclusion, I believe there's a combination of activities in their action plan. Some are very tactical. Some are looking at it as if they're putting a fire out and it'll be just for the time being, which will show itself soon. But some are thinking strategically and really asking themselves, how can we maximize this time to make a real difference in the society where our employees live and work and play, as well as our customers live and work and play. And those that are thinking strategically are addressing it in the right manner in terms of looking at what exactly it is that Black people are saying that they want. They're saying that they want greater social justice. They're saying they want to fight and eradicate racism. They're saying they want opportunity and equality in the workplace. And they're saying they want greater economic opportunities in this country. And that comes from, you know, employment as well as entrepreneurship. So the companies that are functioning strategically are really looking at it from that perspective. And they know that they have to start with their internal audiences, their employees, their stakeholders, and then go out to their customer base. And the smart ones are doing it simultaneously because it is a hot time. And so those brands that are silent, I've been saying your silence is deafening. We're paying attention. So it is important to think strategically, because if you think strategically, you're going to recognize that this is a marathon and not a race and not a sprint. And so you do have to pause and think about it very thoughtfully, very strategically, and in a very culturally sensitive and meaningful ways. And you have to make sure you have counselors at the table that can help you do that. If you're sitting at a table and no one is Black, you're probably going to make some mistakes, and you're perpetuating everything that we've been saying. So the first thing to do to address that is to make sure you have people at the table of color and to actually listen to their counsel and insight. There's nothing more frustrating for us to get a call and then people say, well, no, that's not what we should say. That we should say, you're making the same mistakes. Why aren't you listening? So those are the things, but strategy always has to drive the tactics. Tactics alone are not going to position you the way that you want to be perceived in the long run. And honestly, it could get you in trouble, because now people are paying attention to what brands are doing and what they are not doing. So it is very, very possible for the brands that are not participating in this process to end up on Black Twitter or to end up being boycotted. And so they have to move smartly.
Back in the great case study of Tylenol, you know, it took them weeks to come around. And, you know, they finally affected change, and they're held up as this great case study. But today it's like multi-seconds, mini seconds. If you make a mistake right now, boom, you're everywhere. So it's really a time that everyone has to, you know, just try to be in the strategic, as you talked about, make strategic change. So then we're more comfortable in every aspect of our lives. Do you think it would be a faux pas for, or is it a faux pas for a company to have a director of multicultural marketing or diversity and inclusion if that person isn't a person of color?
Well, I think when it comes to diversity and inclusion, you should have a person of color, because a person of color is going to recognize the challenges that people of color face coming into corporate America. They're also going to have greater insights into the associations and organizations that they should tap into, because again, they are used to functioning in two worlds. You know, in the African American community, we talk about code switching, how, you know, we live in Black culture in our personal life, but when we walk into the office, there's certain terms and things that we're not going to say. So it's just certain knowledge and cultural insights that a person of color has that usually a white person doesn't. Am I going to say it's every white person? There might be a unique unicorn out there. I haven't met them yet, but there might be. But I would advise that it definitely be a person of color. And then when we talk about a director of multicultural marketing, definitely, I think that you should have a person of color. But one thing that I have seen companies and brands mistake is if you bring on a multicultural marketing director, let's say, and he or she is Hispanic, that's fine. But also make sure your team has a Black person, an Asian American Pacific Islander. You know, you might want to bring on, you know, under the Asian Indians, you need to make sure that your marketing committees and your teams, your brand teams are diverse. Because one thing too, Chris, there's a lot of talk about D&I and there's a lot of focus on the C-suite. People need to advance to the C-suite. And I agree with that 100%. But it is so important that your communications teams, marketing, advertising, social media, public relations, that those teams are diverse too. Because honestly, if they're not, you're missing opportunities. And one thing I've been saying for the last 25 years, this isn't just about what's good. It's really about the business case. You know, multicultural audiences together between the African American, the AAPI, and the Hispanic bring almost $4 trillion to the market. African Americans spending outpaces in almost every category the general market. Why wouldn't you strategically market to them? And you have to understand that you cannot expect one campaign to fit all of your audiences. One size does not fit all. So it is very important to make sure that you have a diverse marketing team that wants to and supports multicultural marketing efforts.
So is this a great time to be in the talent placement business, particularly if you have a great network of people of color, or is this a great time to be in your agency, and are you in much more demand than you used to be?
So I think it's a great time. I definitely think right now is a great time for African Americans in a lot of industries and a lot of professions. Definitely, I'm sure my friends that are in HR and D&I are probably getting a lot more phone calls. I know that other African American solo practitioners and small agency owners like myself, yes, we've all been getting many more phone calls than we were a couple of months ago. And so for me, it's an exciting time, but not, Chris, just because of the business opportunity and the growth, the potential growth opportunity. It's an exciting time for me because I do feel like corporate America is finally waking up slowly, and some, not all, but I feel like this was the moment in time that we needed to be shaken. And so for me, it's exciting from a business owner perspective, as a communications professional, but also as an African American woman who does all of those things, because I know that there's change that needs to happen. And corporate America has such a huge responsibility to take a role in the change. It's incumbent upon them to make these changes. And consumers, African Americans, millennials, they're looking for that. They want brands to take a stand on social issues and political issues. It's not business as usual. It's not. And so for me, it's exciting to see this turn or this wave that you and I have talked about. But honestly, only time will tell if it's going to stick and if the companies truly deliver. So as I've been saying, I'm cautiously optimistic.
So Dr. King used to talk about the mountaintop and how he may not get there just a few days before his death, how he may not go with people to the mountain. You've been in this multicultural marketing business for 25 years. You know, we're in a month here in July 2020 where our president is just this week defending Confederate flags. And 25 years ago, and then looking today, did you ever think that you would be further along now, and our culture will be further along? And where are we? Are we just still looking at the mountain, or are we at the mountain, or do you think we're starting to scale it?
I think we're at the bottom of the mountain. I think over the last 20 years, we've been looking at the mountain, and we've gotten to the parking lot of the mountain. Now I think we're starting to look at how do we climb this mountain effectively to get to the top. And I think it's going to be a slow, arduous climb. So I think it's the beginning. I really think it's the beginning.
We'd probably climb better if we climbed all together.
We would definitely climb better if we all climbed together. That is so true. And I will tell you, for me, it's been frustrating that when I talk to companies about the opportunities in the African American consumer market and the Latinx market, because I do both, my argument now is not very different than it was 25 years ago. Our spending habits still like outpace the general market and the general population. Our buying power continues to grow. Our academic and income achievement continues to increase. But it isn't until now, out of fear and out of protests and disruption like I've never seen, that companies are finally waking up. And the truth is, they did not have to get here. They could have prevented some of the stuff. I'm not going to say all the racial stuff, but they could have been addressing their D&I issues much more effectively in-house. They could have been doing community programs in the African American community. There are things they could have been doing where they would be in a much better position than what they are now. And some companies on the community aspect have been doing way better. And I'm happy that I represent clients that have been in the African American community for years and have been doing things. But it's been a slow process. And so I am really hoping that this is the point where we pivot into a positive future.
Well, Alexis, I know you're busy. I know Precise Communications is busy in this time, which is in many ways a great thing for you and your firm. And so thank you for taking time today in a busy time to speak to agency leaders across the country and help us all take a few steps forward.
Thank you, Chris, for having me. I appreciate it, and good luck with Agency 100. I'll be watching.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.